Think about your day right now. Pretty much everything runs on energy, doesn't it? Flipping a switch, charging your phone, boiling the kettle.
Absolutely. We take it for granted most of the time.
But the old way we powered everything, relying so heavily on oil, gas, and coal, it's just not as stable or affordable as it maybe once was.
No, and millions of us felt that quite acutely during the recent energy crisis.
Exactly. Prices just bouncing all over the place, feeling really exposed.
And that exposure is really the heart of the problem, isn't it? Our dependence on those, well, volatile global fossil fuel markets leaves the UK vulnerable. Price shocks, geopolitical stuff. It's a risk.
A big risk. And that's where this new plan comes in the UK government's Clean Power 2030 Action Plan.
Right.
They're pitching this as a new era of clean electricity and calling it the most ambitious reforms in generations. Big words.
They are framing it that way, yeah. It signals a really major shift, not just tinkering. It's meant to be a top-to-bottom transformation.
So for this deep dive, our mission really is to cut through the policy jargon and unpack what's actually in this plan. What are these big targets? Where's this estimated $40 billion per year investment, mostly private, they say, actually going?
Crucial question.
What are the really sticky challenges they need to fix to make this happen? And I guess, ultimately, what could it mean for the UK's energy future? And, well, for you.
Yeah, and the plan itself calls it a sprint towards 2030. That sprint has sort of three main goals.
Okay.
Boosting energy security, making more power here at home, building new industries and the jobs that come with them, and of course making those vital cuts to greenhouse gas emissions.
Right, so shoring things up now, but also building for the future.
Exactly, it's about both.
Okay, let's dive into that vision then. The plan kicks off by saying, look, being hooked on volatile global gas prices, that's the core problem.
Right, straightforward diagnosis. And the proposed solution is just as clear. Shift and shift fast to homegrown clean power. Renewables, low-carbon sources.
Because that's the route to affordability, security, and hitting climate goals.
That's the argument, yes. Long-term affordability, real energy security, and meeting those crucial emissions targets.
And the UK isn't starting from zero here, which must help. We've done a lot in offshore wind, for example.
Definitely an advantage. We have pioneer technologies, and we do have abundant natural resources, wind, solar potential.
Right.
But the plan is very clear that getting to 2030 requires an unprecedented pace of change. Building this stuff takes time, and, we're competing globally for the investment, for the supply chains needed to actually build it all.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. What are the concrete, measurable goals they've put on the table for 2030? The numbers.
Okay, there are a few key metrics. First, they want clean sources, renewables, nuclear, etc., to produce at least as much power as Great Britain consumes in total.
At least as much. So potentially more than 100% of our consumption.
Exactly. Aiming for 100% plus. That's a huge leap from 56% back in 2023.
Wow. Okay, that's a big jump in just 6 years. What else?
The second metric is about the mix of where our electricity actually comes from. They want clean sources to produce at least 95% of Great Britain's total electricity generation.
Okay, so not just relative consumption, but 95% of everything generated. That was about 60% in 2023.
Around that, yeah. So these two targets together really show the scale of the shift away from fossil fuels for generation itself.
And the third goal is about carbon intensity, right?
Yeah.
The actual emissions per unit of electricity.
Yes, reducing the carbon intensity of generation from 171 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour in 2023 down to well below 50 by 2030.
That's a massive drop.
It is, and it's pretty much essential to stay on track for the UK's legally binding carbon budgets.
It really helps to picture this, doesn't it? If you look back, some of the charts in the plan show how the grid has already shifted away from coal and gas use has fluctuated. But even last year, gas was still often the single biggest source, the real workhorse.
Absolutely. Gas often set the price, provided the flexibility. But then you look at the models for 2030 in the plan, it's a completely different picture.
Yeah, it's dominated by wind and solar, these weather-dependent sources.
Which immediately shows you the challenge, huge variability. Big peaks when it's windy and sunny, big troughs when it's not.
And that's why those other bits in the charts, the firm power like nuclear, the dispatchable stuff like gas with carbon capture, and especially flexibility, becomes so incredibly important.
Critical. They have to balance the system minute by minute, second by second when the wind isn't blowing or demand suddenly spikes. That flexibility piece is key.
And getting that future mix means huge increases in the actual capacity of different technologies.
Yeah.
The plan lays out targets in gigawatts, right?
Yes, specific gigawatt ranges for each technology based on modeling of what's needed and what seems feasible.
Let's run through some key ones. Offshore wind, that's the big one, often. From about 14.8 gigaW now.
To a target range of 43 to 50 gigaW by 2030.
That is a colossal increase. So we need to add, what, over 12 gigaW on top of projects already in the pipeline?
That's right. Over 12 gigaW more than what's already committed or under construction. It means building offshore wind farms at a pace we've never seen before.
Onshore wind, which is now, well, back on the table in England.
Which helps boost its target, yeah. From 14.2 gigaW today up to 27 to 29 gigaW. Still needs nearly 9 gigaW added beyond current projects.
And solar needs maybe the biggest volume increase, from about 16.6 gigaW.
To 45 to 47 gigaW. That's over 21 gigaW of new solar needed. Huge. And the plan does mention we could potentially go even higher, especially with rooftop solar.
Right, on homes and businesses. And those crucial flexible technologies you mentioned. Batteries' explosive growth plan there.
Absolutely explosive. From just 4.5 gigaW now to a target range of 23 to 27 gigaW.
Wow. That's essential for that short-term balancing act, right? Soaking up power and releasing it quickly.
Exactly. Hours, not days. For the longer duration stuff, LDES, long-duration energy storage, think pumped hydro or maybe newer tech that needs to more than double too. From just under 3 gigaW now to 4 to 6 gigaW.
Okay. And interconnectors, the cables linking us to Europe.
Planned increase there, too. From about 10 GW currently up to 12 to 14 GW. Another source of flexibility, importing or exporting power.
Good about low-carbon dispatchable power, things you can turn on when needed.
Yeah, that includes biomass, gas with carbon capture, CCUS, maybe hydrogen power plants. The range there is 2 to 7 GW, up from about 4.3 GW now. There's a bit of uncertainty noted around biomass long-term.
And then the firm power nuclear, hydro.
That's actually projected to decrease slightly overall from nearly 6 GW down to 3 to 4 GW. But importantly, the plan supports extending the life of existing nuclear plants, Heysham 2 and Torness, until 2030, and getting Hinkley Point C finished, aiming for 2029-2031 for the first unit.
And gas. What happens to existing gas plants without carbon capture?
Critically, the plan assumes we'll still need around 35 GW of unabated gas capacity available, basically the same level as today.
Really? Why?
As reserve capacity. For security of supply, while those plants figure out their decarbonization pathway, whether that's CCUS or hydrogen conversion over time, it's a transition.
Got it. And finally, consumer-led flexibility. Smart tech in our homes.
Big growth plan there, too. From about 2.5 gigaW today up to 10 to 12 gigaW. That's people shifting their EV charging, smart heating, that sort of thing.
It's vital to remember these are ranges, though, isn't it? Not fixed numbers.
Absolutely. The plan acknowledges there are different pathways, different tech mixes that could work. They need to be flexible as things develop, see what deploys fastest, what costs come down.
Mm-hmm. Hitting these kinds of numbers in, what, 6 years? It sounds incredibly challenging. What are the biggest roadblocks the plan identifies? Planning permission always seems to be a huge one.
It really is a major focus. The core problem identified is that the current processes, especially for big infrastructure projects, are just too slow, too complex, and fragmented across different parts of the UK.
They just weren't built for this speed and scale.
Exactly. They add cost, they add delay. They weren't designed for this kind of rapid, massive build-out.
So what's the plan to grease the wheels?
Well, there's a whole list of actions, things like letting planning bodies recover more costs, so hopefully they can hire more staff, providing better support to developers before they formally apply.
Trying to smooth things out early.
Yeah, and boosting resources at key bodies like the Planning Inspectorate, local authorities, the statutory consultees like Natural England.
And holding them to account. Setting targets.
Yes, establishing new performance standards for all the public bodies involved, and also improving the quality of the applications developers submit in the first place, better guidance, publishing best practice.
I saw something about a dedicated unit for tricky projects.
Correct. The new Clean Power 2030 unit will bring together groups, major groups, community reps, industry to look at complex projects early on, try and, stress test them and iron out potential problems sooner rather than later.
And the onshore wind situation in England.
The plan confirms the de facto ban is lifted, and the specific planning guidance is set to be updated in 2025, which should provide more clarity.
What about legal challenges? Judicial reviews can slow things down.
It acknowledges that's a factor. They're exploring potential reforms to the judicial review process for these big infrastructure projects based on a recent review. The aim is to reduce delays while, crucially, maintaining access to justice. Similar work is happening in Scotland, too.
And dealing with environmental impacts, especially offshore, compensating for damage.
Yeah, they're working with the Scottish government on establishing industry-funded marine recovery funds. The idea is offshore wind developers pay into these funds to support nature restoration projects elsewhere as compensation for unavoidable impacts. It's meant to streamline that part of the process.
Okay, so that's planning. But then you actually need to plug these projects into the grid. Connections look like another massive bottleneck.
Huge bottleneck. The grid just wasn't designed for this flood of renewable projects wanting to connect, often in places far from demand. The queue to get a connection is astronomical. One chart showed over 700 GLU waiting.
Wow, 700 GLU, that's way more than needed.
Way more, and projects face years, sometimes decades, of waiting time in the current queue. It's clearly not working.
So how do they fix the queue?
The plan leans heavily on recommendations from the recent Electricity Networks Commissioner's report. A key action is accelerating 80 major transmission projects that the grid operator, ENZO, has identified as essential by 2030. Some currently aren't scheduled till after 2030, so they need speeding up.
And managing the queue itself, who gets to connect first?
They're changing the rules, moving to a first-ready, first-connected approach, but prioritizing projects that align strategically with the 2030 plan's capacity goals. If your project fits what's needed for 2030, you move up the queue.
So aligning connections with the overall strategy, when does that kick in?
Updated grid connection offers reflecting this new process are expected before the end of 2025. They're also planning legislation to embed this strategic alignment more firmly.
Is there any flexibility in that?
Yes, some flexibility is mentioned, like allowing projects that maybe aren't strictly needed for 2030 to connect if capacity becomes available, or letting developers swap technologies within a grid zone if it doesn't cause new problems. They also reiterate the preference for overhead lines for cost reasons, but with undergrounding in sensitive landscapes.
And using local networks where possible.
Definitely. Connecting smaller projects to the distribution network rather than the main transmission grid is often faster and cheaper, so that's encouraged.
Okay, beyond those big system issues planning, grid, what about getting specific types of projects built faster? Wind, solar, nuclear?
Yeah, there are specific actions. For renewables, the main tool is the Contracts for Difference scheme, the CFD auctions.
That's the government support mechanism giving price stability.
Exactly. The plan aims to improve how those CFD auctions are run, particularly the next one, Allocation Round 7, or AR7, to make sure they actually secure the capacity needed for each technology.
How are they tweaking the auctions?
They're considering changes like using information from the sealed bids received for offshore wind to potentially adjust the final budget, trying to maximize the capacity they contract within the available money. They'll also publish a clearer schedule of future auctions to give industry more certainty.
Industry has raised concerns about the pricing in recent auctions, haven't they?
They have. The plan acknowledges this and says they will review auction parameters, including the reference prices, trying to balance industry concerns with value for money and hitting the targets. For AR7, they're also slightly relaxing the rules for standard offshore wind, allowing projects without full planning consent yet to bid.
Why do that?
To boost competition, basically. Get more projects into the auction, potentially drive prices down, and get the supply chain involved earlier.
What about practical issues like wind farms interfering with radar?
Yes, that's addressed. They're coordinating with aviation and defense. For offshore wind, the government is stepping in to fund radar mitigation solutions identified via Program Nord, taking that cost off developers. Similar work is ongoing with the MOD for onshore wind and with the CAA for civil radar.
And the new state energy company, Great British Energy, what's its role?
GBE, with its $8.3 billion initial capitalization, is meant to help accelerate things, potentially investing alongside the private sector. It has a specific focus on supporting up to 8 GW of community and local energy projects.
So solar on schools, community wind farms, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Plus, the plan mentions supporting solar through things like the Warm Homes Plan and looking into solar canopies on car parks. There's a call for evidence coming on that.
What happens to older renewable projects, ones built under earlier support schemes?
That's a really important point. About 9 GW of older capacity, mainly under the renewables obligation, lose their support by 2030. The plan flags this risk.
They can just shut down.
Potentially. So the plan confirms these projects can now bid for new CFD contracts, starting from AR7 if they repower or refurbish. It gives them a route to keep operating.
Good. And nuclear. Hinkley is delayed, but still key for that firm power.
Yes, continued support for Hinkley Point C delivery is confirmed, targeting 2029-2031 for the first unit, and as we mentioned, support for extending Heysham 2 and Torness to 2030.
What about newer tech? Floating wind, tidal.
They're seen more as post-2030 contributors, but the plan supports their development now. Things like the Floating Offshore Wind Manufacturing Investment Scheme, FLOW-MIS, to upgrade ports, potential support from the National Wealth Fund, and GBE partnering with the Crown Estate.
Okay, so we've got the plans to build stuff and connect it. But the whole system needs to work differently with so much variable power. Flexibility and market efficiency seem crucial here.
Absolutely fundamental. As you move away from predictable fossil fuels, the system needs new tools to balance supply and demand constantly. When the wind drops, something needs to fill the gap instantly. When there's too much sun, you need to store it or use it.
Those 2030 charts really show that need for a flexible base layer.
They do. Historically, the demand side was often overlooked, but now it's central.
So what provides that flexibility? What kind of tech?
It's a whole suite of things. Short duration flexibility comes from batteries, grid-scale ones, smaller ones in homes. Also, consumer-led flexibility, smart EV charging, smart heat pumps, businesses shifting demand.
And longer duration.
Longer duration comes from interconnectors, LDES like pumped hydro or liquid air energy storage, gas plants with carbon capture, and potentially hydrogen-fired power plants down the line.
So what are the specific actions to actually get more flexibility built and used?
A key commitment is a joint low-carbon flexibility roadmap in 2025. That's DE, SNZ, Offgem, and NISO getting together to consolidate all the actions and set clear milestones. That should provide some clarity.
And making sure these flexible assets can actually play in the market and earn money.
Yes. NISO is working on market reforms to improve access for batteries, for demand-side response. Removing barriers, better transparency, making it easier for them to stack revenues by providing multiple grid services.
The capacity market that pays generators just to be available is being changed too?
It is. Reforms are coming in ahead of the 2025 pre-qualification process. Things like longer 3-year agreements for existing flexible assets and a new 9-year agreement specifically designed to support investment in new low-carbon flexible technologies like LDES or maybe hydrogen.
Are they tackling specific roadblocks for batteries?
Yes, several. Prioritizing them in the grid connection queue reforms, considering them in future planning reforms. Looking at health and safety regulations, a consultation on environmental permits for batteries is due by June 2025. And for smaller home batteries, maybe financing help via the Warm Homes Plan, plus potentially removing levies on stored electricity or vehicle-to-grid charging that's being reviewed in the 2025 roadmap.
That could make a difference for homeowners. And consumer flexibility getting people involved.
Yeah, actions there include improving market access through MISO's work, ensuring the rollout of market-wide half-hourly settlement, MHHS.
That's the smart meter data plumbing, right?
Exactly, essential for smart tariffs. Also, using digital tools to get better visibility of all these distributed assets like home batteries or EVs. And they'll consult on how consumer flexibility can participate better in the capacity market. Plus, innovation funding for things like vehicle-to-grid.
Long-duration storage, LDES, seems vital for backing up renewables over days, not just hours. What's the plan there?
The big barrier is investment risk. These are often huge long-term projects. So the plan confirms they will introduce a cap-and-floor investment support scheme.
How does that work?
It basically guarantees a minimum revenue level for the project, reducing the downside risk for investors while capping the maximum returns. It provides more certainty. Offgem will deliver the scheme.
And hydrogen power and carbon capture.
Seen as key future options for dispatchable, flexible, low-carbon power. The National Wealth Fund has that £5 8 BN ring fence, which can support CCUS and green hydrogen production. For hydrogen to power, H2P, they're developing a specific business model, like a CFD, and will consult on it in spring 2025.
But you need hydrogen infrastructure first.
Crucially, yes. So designing new business models for hydrogen transport and storage infrastructure is planned for 2025 using powers from the Energy Act 2023. That's key to unlocking H2P. Hydrogen production support is already happening through separate auctions.
And innovation funding has helped get some of these LDES techs ready.
Yes, about $100 million over the last decade has gone into developing novel LDES, like liquid air storage, getting them closer to commercial deployment.
Okay, zooming out again, the whole electricity market needs updating. That's the REMA review.
Right.
Review of electricity market arrangements.
Exactly. The current market rules were designed for a fossil fuel world. They don't really work efficiently with huge amounts of variable, near zero marginal cost renewables. REMA is looking at how to fix that.
Ensure it works, guarantees security, benefits consumers. Where is REMA at?
They've just published an autumn update with this plan. The aim is to finalize the key policy decisions by mid-2025, importantly, before that AR7 CFD auction opens, to give investors some clarity.
What are the big options they're considering?
For the wholesale market, they've narrowed it down to two main options. Either moving to zonal pricing, where the price of electricity varies across different regions of the country.
So power might be cheaper in Scotland if it's windy there?
Potentially, yes. Or the alternative is sticking with a reformed national pricing model, but with significant changes to how network constraints and locations are factored in. Both are apparently still under equal consideration.
Zonal pricing sounds like a massive change. Could spook investors?
It's definitely a fundamental shift. The plan acknowledges this potential for uncertainty and says it will be factored into the cost-benefit analysis. But it also argues staying with the current system isn't really viable long-term. Crucially, they state existing CFDs and those awarded in AR7 would be protected from zonal price risk if it were introduced.
Okay. And the capacity market is also being reformed to manage the transition away from unabated gas.
Yes. Beyond supporting flexibility, it needs to handle the existing gas fleet. This involves exploring pathways for them to convert to hydrogen or fit carbon capture. New rules coming in from February 2026 require new or refurbished fossil fuel plants to be decarbonization ready.
Meaning they have to show they could convert later.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
You need a credible plan, and plants bidding into the 2026 capacity market auction will need to comply.
How do they make sure the grid physically stays stable with all this change?
System operability. That's a huge job for NESO, the grid operator. They're developing an operability strategy for 2030, due in spring 2025. It involves better forecasting, managing inertia, voltage, all the technical stuff, and better reporting on the emissions impact of keeping the system balanced.
And those network charges, TNUS, that hit remote wind farms hard.
Yes, the transmission network use of system charges. The plan acknowledges the volatility and high costs, especially for Scottish generators. Ofgem has proposed a temporary cap and floor mechanism to try and provide more stability there.
Okay, shifting to the retail side. Market-wide half-hourly settlement, MHHS. That's coming.
It is. It's a massive behind-the-scenes upgrade. Basically means everyone's energy use gets recorded every 30 minutes instead of daily or less often.
And that enables
Smart tariffs, time-of-use pricing, real consumer flexibility. It allows you to actually benefit financially from using power when it's cheap and green. Getting the smart meter rollout finish is obviously vital for this, too.
and protecting consumers through all this change, making sure it's fair.
Strong emphasis on that. Building trust in smart tech. Making sure benefits are available to everyone, regardless of income or how engaged they are. Keeping the price cap, strengthening Ofgem, looking at rules for price comparison websites, better compensation if things go wrong.
Right. Okay, building all this new kit, wind farms, grid lines, batteries, needs a massive industrial effort, supply chains, workers.
Yeah.
What's the plan there?
This is framed as both a huge challenge and a massive economic opportunity. The challenge is scaling up domestic supply chains and skills incredibly fast, especially with global competition,
And the opportunity.
is to capture those economic benefits right here in the UK. Create skilled jobs, drive investment into communities, especially coastal areas or regions transitioning away from fossil fuels. The plan mentions examples like data centers in Scotland using green power or hospital solar farms in Swansea.
So what are the concrete actions to build those supply chains and skills?
Well, firstly, the plan itself is intended as a strong signal to investors. Build here, the demand is coming. A new industrial strategy is due in spring 2025, including a specific plan for clean energy industries.
Bringing people together.
Yes, a new supply chains and workforce industry forum is being convened early 2025, including trade unions, to really understand the needs and coordinate action.
Financial incentives, too.
Yes. The CFD scheme will have a clean industry bonuses to encourage offshore wind developers to invest in UK manufacturing, particularly in specific priority areas. The National Wealth Fund has that £5, 8 billion ring fence for green sectors like ports, gigafactories, green hydrogen, and Great British Energy's investment is also meant to support UK supply chain growth.
Helping the grid companies buy stuff.
Yeah, Ofgem is launching something called the Electricity Network's Advanced Procurement Mechanism early next year to help transmission owners place larger, longer-term orders for things like cables and transformers, giving suppliers more certainty.
What about the actual people, the workforce? Getting folks trained up.
Big focus here. Analysis shows lots of skills are transferable from older industries, but there are definite gaps. So they're setting up the Office for Clean Energy Jobs.
What will that do?
Focus specifically on the skilled workforce needed. Support transition regions. Push for high-quality jobs, better diversity in the sector.
Practical training steps.
A pilot scheme for regional skills interventions, mapping local needs, careers advice, funding. Working with the new Skills England body to align apprenticeships and qualifications. Transforming FE colleges into technical excellence colleges using existing Get Britain Working initiatives.
I saw mention of a skills passport.
Yes, that's missing. DESNZ is involved in an industry-led pilot launching by January 2025. It's a digital tool to help workers see how their existing skills map onto clean energy jobs and what training they might need, making career pathways clearer.
And acknowledging work already happening in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland.
Yes, the plan explicitly notes the parallel strategies and skills initiatives in the devolved nations.
Okay. This all sounds incredibly expensive. That £40 billion a year figure keeps coming up. What's the bottom line on cost, and what does it mean for our energy bills?
It is a huge investment figure, yes, $40 billion per year for the next 6 years. But the plan stresses the vast majority is expected from the private sector, not the taxpayer directly.
And the impact on bills. Will they go up?
Well, the analysis cited from NISO suggests that delivering this plan could result in similar overall system costs by 2030 compared to today. The potential for lower bills comes more in the longer term as the system benefits from cheap renewables and operates more efficiently.
But the main argument on costs seems to be avoiding the alternative, right? Avoiding those gas price shocks.
Exactly. That's the core message on cost. A clean, homegrown power system protects consumers from volatile global gas prices. They point to the $44 billion the government spent on energy support schemes during the crisis, arguing much of that could have been avoided with a system like the one planned for 2030. Less exposure means less risk of those huge bill spikes.
And for individuals, the plan links back to consumer flexibility and things like the Warm Homes Plan.
Yes, enabling you to use smart tech to shift your demand, plus support for insulation, heat pumps, maybe solar through the Warm Homes Plan. These are presented as ways you can directly benefit through lower bills and more control.
And community benefits, too.
Yes, a commitment that communities hosting new infrastructure should see tangible benefits. Guidance is planned on community benefit funds, and there'll be a communications push.
It's also stressed this massive build-out needs to happen carefully, considering the natural environment.
Yes, the plan explicitly talks about tackling the twin climate and nature crises. It's not just about hitting net zero, it's also about restoring nature, meeting Environment Act targets, the 30 by 30 goal.
So integrating energy infrastructure with nature protection.
Precisely. The principle is the mitigation hierarchy. First, try to avoid damaging sensitive habitats altogether. If you can't avoid it, minimize the impact. Then, restore habitats where possible. And only as a last resort, provide compensation for unavoidable damage, like through those marine recovery funds we mentioned.
Okay, so it's a vast, interconnected plan. Hundreds of actions. How do we know if it's actually working? And what are the key next steps to watch out for?
Delivery is everything now. The new Clean Power 2030 unit within government is tasked with monitoring progress across all these different strands. And there's ongoing collaboration needed with devolved governments, regulators, and industry groups like the Offshore Wind Industry Council, the Solar Task Force.
And there are specific milestones coming up soon, things we can track.
Yes, the plan lists quite a few upcoming milestones. That joint low-carbon flexibility roadmap is due in 2025. The market engagement on the hydrogen-to-power business model is spring 2025. Designing those crucial hydrogen transport and storage business models happens during 2025.
What else is coming in 2025?
Reports from the Solar Task Force and the Onshore Wind Task Force are due by spring. The consultation on CFD reforms is early 2025. The big REMA decision on market reform is aimed for mid-2025.
Capacity market changes?
Consultation on consumer flexibility in the capacity market is expected shortly, with the main reforms implemented ahead of the 2025 pre-qualification round.
Any other key dates for next year?
NISO's system operability strategy for 2030 is due spring 2025. That skills passport pilot should be running by January. The first meeting of the Supply Chains and Workforce Forum is early 2025. The wider industrial strategy, including the Clean Energy Plan, is spring 2025. And Ofgem's network procurement mechanism launches early 2025. Oh, and an updated carbon budget delivery plan is due in due course.
It really does feel like a sprint, as they called it, a very packed schedule.
It absolutely is. And this plan really lays bare the sheer scale and complexity of the task. It's a rapid transformation across generation, networks, markets, supply chain skills, everything.
But the stated goals are clear. Secure supply, lower and more stable bills in the long run, new industries, deep emissions cuts. It's pitched as transforming the way this country invests in and builds its future.
Building a system that's hopefully cleaner, more secure, and ultimately more affordable.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, I think, is how much it relies not just on huge engineering projects, but also on digitalization and, crucially, on involving you, the energy user.
Absolutely. That demand-side participation, enabling you to engage with and benefit from how you use energy, that's becoming absolutely central to making the whole system work efficiently and affordably.
Which maybe leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. This massive shift to clean power isn't just about infrastructure miles away. It's fundamentally reshaping the relationship between energy and our daily lives, our homes, how we travel, our connected world. As this new age of electricity really takes hold, what opportunities might it create for you, and how might you choose to participate in this changing energy landscape?